Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on this really, really nice day with a bit of a breeze. It's always special when people take the time to come sit inside somewhere instead of being out and planting flowers. But what a nice interior to be sitting in. I hope you're all. Has anybody never been to this church? Anybody new to this church? Oh, good. It's a lovely place, isn't it? It's so different. It's very congregational, isn't it? Like a congregationalist meeting house, I think, with the tall, clear windows, no stained glass. It's just so open and airy. I first came to this church about 30 years ago when my parents moved out to 10 Mile Road and became members here, and have always found this to be a really special place. So we are especially delighted that we could drag Ann Hagedorn out of Ripley and away from a really, really aggressive, vigorous writing schedule for the book she's working on currently, to come down and give a talk for us. She doesn't give very many talks because she's always so busy writing, but if you would like to hear her talk about some of her other books, I would invite you to check out C-SPAN, because they have at least 5 interviews with her. And of course, there are interviews all over the internet, but the C-SPAN interviews are especially nice because they're usually about an hour long, so you really get to hear her talk in depth on her subjects. Ann has degrees from Ohio's own Denison University, including her undergraduate degree and an honorary doctorate, as well as degrees from Columbia and University of Michigan. She was a writer for the Wall Street Journal and a special projects editor for the New York Daily News. She has taught at several universities, including Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. She doesn't remember this. I've never asked her about this, but we met many years ago in Ripley when she was at my family's favorite restaurant, Cohart's, and we would take the hour drive up there to eat, and I was thinking about going to graduate school in history. And there she was, scribbling away in one of her infamous notebooks. She has always the same kind of notebook that she takes her notes in. And my mother decided to interrupt her at one point and say, you know, I know you are an historian, and my daughter's thinking about going to graduate school in history. And she gave us a very polite but probably a little perfunctory answer, because she was so intent on getting back to her writing. And but I remembered it very fondly as a brush with greatness in Ripley, Ohio. How many of those do we get? I don't know, Giles and Diane, maybe you can answer that question. But she has written many books in her trademark narrative nonfiction style, but including Sleeper Agent, about a Soviet agent who worked just up the road in Dayton, Ohio, who shared atomic secrets with our Cold War enemy. She wrote a book called Savage Peace, which is a biography of a year, I think an incredibly interesting concept, the year 1919, which is a really seminal transitional year in American history for so many reasons. And she did a fantastic job of capturing all of those reasons and all of the turbulence, all of the modernism, and all of the foreshadowing of World War II, looming already on the horizon just at the conclusion of World War I. She wrote Ransom, which is a history of international kidnapping. She wrote Invisible Soldiers, which is about America's mercenary industrial complex. And the book that I think we are probably most familiar with here in the Ohio River Valley, and one she's going to draw from heavily today, her story of the Underground Railroad, called Beyond the River. The positive reception to Ann's books from readers and critics alike is no doubt because she manages to take a ponderous mass of material and put it in the machinery of her very good brain and churn out a story that's eminently readable, because her goal, as I've understood it from talking to her and listening to her many interviews, is always to keep a story alive, to make a story known to people who are inquisitive, and to make sure that it doesn't disappear entirely from history. These are all laudable goals. she manages in taking that ponderous mass, usually to, and I would say always that I've seen, turn it into something that's inspirational as well as informative. Today, I wanted to mention that she does bury herself in research when she's investigating, and like a sleeper agent, we know she exists somewhere, but we don't see her because she doesn't really emerge very often from that process of researching and writing. And like the best academic histories, her books beg you to read the source notes, and I have just a little sampling of the copious source notes she used for Sleeper Agent. These are in her own words. She used letters, journals, postcards, news clips, yearbook photos, tax wrappers, I don't even know what that is, ship manifests, passports, arrest records, application forms, even inscriptions in books, and thousands of pages of governmental reports, and still managed to write a readable book. Then she reads the secondary sources when she's all done with that research process. That's ponderous in its own right. In the end, what she is shooting for is something that's eminently readable, that covers the topic thoroughly, and in an engaging way that ensures that story won't be lost. I could go on and on about her work, but I'd rather listen to her. I want to thank all of you again for being here. I want to thank Ann for being here, for taking time out of a very, very rigorous writing schedule. And I also want to thank Amy O'Leary while she's here. The Clermont County Historical Society has a bank sponsor for the first time in our history, and she's come to support us today. So we're very grateful, and I hope you all get a chance to say hi to her in our reception. Okay, now let's hear from Ann Hagedorn. Please welcome her.
Here we are. And okay. And there are many of you here. How many of you here are a member of the Clermont County History Society? Yeah. Great, yeah, that's great, okay. I've been a fan for many years as a researcher and an explorer of the past, and as Kelly said, I do the primary source research first, kind of cull it, sift it, organize it in story structures, and then I go to the secondary sources. But the local organizations are really like the great assistants, so to speak, in the quest to enlighten the American public about the truths, the triumphs, and the struggles in our nation's past, which means they offer bits of wisdom for the future. They're very important. Wasn't it Winston Churchill who said, the further back you look, the further forward you'll be able to see? In my humble opinion, local history societies are like the struts and braces beneath the hull being our nation's historical narrative. And this is especially true, I do believe, after research off and on for years of the antebellum years. I think it's especially true for the task of understanding antebellum America. Perhaps bringing the forgotten to the forefront, as local history societies so often do, is helping someday, somehow, to end racial prejudice. Since the publication of Beyond the River, I've given many lectures informing audiences nationwide about the bold men and women, black and white, who devised daring strategies to assist slaves seeking freedom, especially throughout this region, which, as most of you probably know, was called the Borderland. Madison, Indiana, then in Ohio, Cincinnati, New Richmond, Ripley, Marietta, etc. And in Kentucky, Louisville, Maysville, Augusta, etc. The list is long. A few years ago, after one of those lectures, during the Q&A, a young woman in the audience, likely in her early 20s, raised her hand and said she had memorized a quote from Beyond the River, my third book, which is a narrative about the Underground Railroad, and uses the Ohio River Valley as the narrative I invited her, of course, to stand up and recite it. She did. It was a quote from John Parker, who many of you in this audience know was a former slave in Mobile, Alabama, and after arriving in Ripley, Ohio in 1849, he would be known for his bold travels back into slave territory to help organize and lead escapes. First, she read 2 sentences, handwritten on a note card. Quote, "These echoes coming to me now and then take me back to the days and nights when my blood ran fast. My years were few, and hatred of slavery, of which I was a victim, prompted me to do what I could to serve my unfortunate brothers." Unquote. And then she paused, put the card aside, and began a recitation that was truly memorable. Quote, no night was too dark or too cold for me to issue forth on a mission of relief, and to those who came knocking at my door, a pair of rusty pistols and a hunting knife grown dull as old friends whose presence I have not felt for years. With their work finished, they, like their owner, will soon be forgotten. Unquote. As she demonstrated, and as many of us here today well know, John Parker has not been forgotten, thanks to the determined people in Ripley who restored the Parker House, opened the museum, and continued to research the details of his remarkable life. That's just one example of the excitement and importance of local history, brought to the forefront by organizations like yours. Standing here, I say bravo to you all for working hard to be sure that the lessons that can be learned from the past will not be forgotten. Here at the Cranston Memorial Presbyterian Church, which I learned recently was founded in 1821, correct? Nearly from the start, its congregation was integrated. Its pews would eventually be filled with abolitionists, many of whom were active in the grassroots network so often referred to as the Underground Railroad. As I said, I'm honored to be here. And now let us dive into the topic of trust and teamwork in that underground movement. Since the publication of Beyond the River, as I said, more than 20 years ago, yes, 23 years to be exact, I have, as I said, given numerous lectures based on the book's themes, always with the hope of awakening people to the importance of Ohio during the dangerous, passionate, and immensely challenging crusade to end slavery in this nation. But today, for this audience, I obviously don't need to be a walking PR for Ohio, or for Ripley, or for New Richmond, specifically. What I can do is share a few observations about the Underground Railroad and perhaps smash a myth or two, plus weave in 1 or 2 new details from my recent research for my next book, which will focus on abolitionist women. My hope, by the way, for that narrative is to basically build a ladder, so to speak, that will take a group of female abolitionists out of the abyss of obscurity, and thus offer readers a new path of awareness, a sort of new terrain for the abolitionist movement. Let's begin with 2 quite common misconceptions, which we could say may have reached myth-like levels among the general public. They are simple, yet profound. First, that the Underground Railroad is all about tunnels, secret rooms and cellars and barns, hidden doorways, and more. As an author on the road for the Beyond the River book tour, audience members would often ask, "Did you see the tunnels?" Many times asked. One day while in New York, I had lunch with a former colleague who was curious about why I had written a book about the Underground Railroad instead of a topic linked to stories I had covered as a staff writer at the Wall Street Journal, mostly about white-collar crime. I told him about my goals to spread the word about the significance of Ohio in the anti-slavery cause, and how Ohio in the antebellum years had many anti-slavery societies as well as abolitionist newspapers. I noted the Philanthropist in New Richmond and Cincinnati, and the Anti-Slavery Bugle in Salem, Ohio. And I mentioned Overland, as well as Ripley, etc., etc. Plus, I shared a few stories about the Beyond the River research. But alas, at the end of our conversation, he said, "Well, but tell me, did you see any tunnels?" It never goes away. My answer was, and has been always, the Underground Railroad is about far more than tunnels and hidden rooms. It's about truly, truly remarkable people. Whether you're talking about the courage of the slaves to even attempt an escape, or the bravery of the free blacks and whites who risked their livelihoods and even their lives to participate in the covert networks. Yes, the houses, the cellars, the tunnels, they are alluring and excellent ways to awaken people to that history. By the way, there are now, I think, 101 houses in the state of Ohio that have been confirmed by the U.S. Department of Interior, specifically the National Park Service, as Underground Railroad safe houses. But alas, it's the people, the astute, often brilliant, morally brilliant, always brave people who must be the focus. We must find out who they all were, what they did exactly, how they did it, what motivated them, what they were up against, and what we can learn from them. That's what counts the most. And that's what I call the moral brilliance of the Underground Railroad. Indeed, there was plenty of that moral brilliance in the state of Ohio. Plus, by the way, all through the borderland, including Kentucky. And that brings us to the next misconception, that everyone on that side of the river was pro-slavery, and everyone on this side, all the way to Canada, was an anti-slavery advocate, wearing a halo. Simply not true. Consider this quote from the philanthropist, that wonderful New Richmond publication. This is from the 1838 issue. Quote, "When was Ohio free? Never. It is a mere raceground between the slave states in Canada, between the land of violence and oppression and the land of liberty. And all its highways and byways are so many horses entered and scoured and run over by slaveholders and their hirelings," unquote. It's 1838. Let's look at a few facts. In 1787, some of you are sitting out there with PhDs in history will know this, of course, but in 1787, the Northwest Ordinance banned human servitude in the territory north of the Ohio River. Word would spread, of course, that beyond the river was a place of freedom. And gradually, the river would lure slavery's two cultures, one of resistance and one of oppression, which often collided on the river. Sort of, you have to have the image like sheets of ice grinding one against the other. Those conflicting cultures grew with intensity on both sides of the river, and with time, as more freedom seekers escaped across it, their flight paths, so to speak, became more and more widely known, thus stirring the emergence of a cottage industry of slave catchers. Soon there were risk takers on both shores, for and against slavery. Those who were part of the Underground Railroad and or devout abolitionists versus those who nailed the wanted posters on trees and buildings, advertising hefty rewards for capturing the men and women who were, when needed, helping slaves to escape. The resistors versus the oppressors. The only true freedom might be to reach Canada, but alas, slave hunters would turn up in Windsor and Chatham, Canada, two of the well-known destinations. Despite the Northwest Ordinance and Ohio's Constitution, which banned slavery, there were the Black Laws passed by the state of Ohio in 1807, which included bold restrictions for free blacks, such as prohibiting blacks from testifying against white citizens in court. Clearly, the state's image of being the land of the free was an illusion. To be sure, nothing had outlawed racial prejudice, which flourished and only intensified as there were more successful freedom seekers heading towards Canada and more safe houses between the river and the Canadian border. So it was that the women and men assisting the slaves who dared to reach the river and then to cross it personified sheer fortitude. Or as one of my former students once said, they were the definition of the word guts. These were seemingly ordinary people who dared to achieve extraordinary things. Or you could say that they were extraordinary people who just appeared to be ordinary rather covertly. Yes, indeed, delving deeply into the world of the underground networks reveals more than architectural intrigue, for the networks were filled with smart strategists and team players on both sides of the river. As you all likely know, Ripley was renowned among pro-slavery advocates, slaveholders, and slave catchers as the quote-unquote abolitionist hellhole. And of course, among the individuals who inspired such a widely known brand name were Reverend John Rankin, John Parker, Thomas McKay, the Collins family, Reverend John Bennington Mahan, Alexander Campbell, and Reverend James Gilliland at the Red Oak Presbyterian Church. And equally active in Ripley's double life were the women, Jean Rankin, Catherine McKay, Miranda Parker, and of course the visitors such as Harriet Beecher Stowe, who apparently knew Catherine McKay and definitely knew John Rankin, as well as one of his sons who was studying at the Lane Seminary in Cincinnati in 1838 and 1839. Regarding lessons we can learn from these citizens of conscience, as I call them, it's important to note the fact that it was more than 200 years ago when Reverend John Rankin wrote a series, a Presbyterian minister, by the way, beginning here in the Presbyterian Church. I'm sure he spoke many times here in New Richmond. Anyway, he wrote a series of rather ardent anti-slavery letters to his brother Thomas in Virginia after receiving the letter from Thomas about the latest news, including the fact that he was making a lot of money and he had purchased at least one slave. Rankin responded with 13 letters, not approving of what his brother was doing, published as a series in the local paper, which was called The Castigator, produced by Rankin's neighbor, David Ammon. In one letter, Rankin described slavery as, quote, a never-failing fountain of the grossest immorality and one of the deepest sources of human misery. It hangs like a mantle of night over our republic and shrouds its rising glories, unquote. In another one, he wrote that at the basis of slavery is racial prejudice, but at the basis of that is the love of gain, which is, quote, the polluted fountain whence issue all the dreadful evils that pervade our world. It gives energy to the tyrant's sword, it drenches the earth with blood, and it binds whole nations in chains, unquote. And in the last of the letters, this one published on February 22nd, 1825, he wrote, quote, even after a people who have been long enslaved are emancipated, it will require them to pass through several generations in order to regain their original strength of mind and to give the world a fair exhibition of the great powers they truly possess, unquote. It's 200 years ago. Ammon soon published the letters in book form. Thus, Rankin's words and wisdom from both the newspaper and the book shot through the Ohio River Valley with the intensity of a spark hitting gunpowder. In fact, one of the warehouses in Maysville that was housing many copies of the book was actually burned down. But soon, Rankin's brother traveled to Ripley with his one or more slaves, I've never been able to confirm just how many, and freed them. In 1830, a New Jersey publisher discovered Rankin's letters, printed the letters in a new book that would result in many printings and be widely dispersed, even to England. The second edition found its way to William Lloyd Garrison, who then serialized the letters in 1832 in his recently launched anti-slavery newspaper entitled Liberator. In the 1838 edition of the Book of Letters, that would be the 5th edition, Rankin wrote a preface that seems both timeless and timely, and he closed like this, quote, "Let all friends of justice do what they can in their several circles, and according to their various stations, capacities, and opportunities. And all their little streams of exertion will, in the process of time, flow together and constitute a mighty river that shall sweep away the yoke of oppression and purge our nation from the abominations of slavery," unquote. That was probably written in 1837. So it was that the Presbyterian pastor's words and his passion reached many people, as did the actions and words of all others who were part of his network. But for it all to work as well as it could, obviously there had to be both trust and teamwork. So do think about trust for a moment. Lies about both races were rampant in antebellum America. Put yourself in the shoes of each, the slave escaping and the network participant, and think about entrusting your life to a stranger who may or may not, in your mind and in reality, be worthy of any trust at all. With time, trust became more and more of an issue. By the mid to late 1830s, there was a burgeoning industry of con artists, perhaps as common as today's online scammers. The trick was that they would tell slaves seeking freedom that they were part of the underground movement, thus appearing to be helpful. And then at some point in the arranged escape, they would shackle and return the slaves to their owners, and then, of course, collect a hefty reward. In Ohio's Adams County, there was in fact a man who was in the habit of searching local newspapers on the Kentucky side as well as in Ohio for slave owners' notices of cash rewards for the return of runaways, whom he would find and then deceive. With the proceeds from his betrayals, he had been able to buy a house and at least 100 acres of land. Eventually he was caught, however, in action, thanks to a man in Kentucky who apparently had figured out the scam and who worked with another man on the Ohio side to expose and to catch the con artist by tricking him in the midst of his own chicanery. Distinctly, it was a war before the war, as there were villains and heroes throughout the Ohio Valley, in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and of course in Kentucky. The Kentucky ties to the underground were, in fact, rather vast. For example, there was the much-beloved resident of Augusta, Kentucky, who was arrested in September 1852 for assisting the slave of Blackstone H. Rankins, is the guy's name. Dr. Perkins, as he was called, was a free black 76-year-old man who made his living baking cakes and breads. At the same time, he helped runaway slaves, apparently as often as he could. After his trial in 1853, he was sentenced to 3 years in the Kentucky State Penitentiary. Soon after he entered the prison, the residents of Augusta began a huge campaign to urge the Kentucky governor to grant executive clemency for Perkins because of his age. Sadly, the governor rejected the petition. 8 months later, Perkins died. No time today to include the many stories, such as the saga of Delia Webster, Calvin Fairbank, and the Lewis Hayden family. See the book about it by Randolph Runyon. And I did learn recently that there were at least 2 Shaker communities in Kentucky active in the underground movement. They owned thousands of acres, which they used as safe grounds, of course, to assist slaves on the run. To be sure, Kentucky was hardly a state of just pro-slavery anti-abolitionists. There were Presbyterian, Methodist, and Baptist churches in Kentucky that were strongholds of anti-slavery sentiment, some boldly denying membership to slaveholders. The Concord Presbyterian Church in Carlisle, Kentucky, that's about 16 miles north of Paris, Kentucky, and about 35 miles from the Ohio River, where Reverend Rankin preached for 4 years before moving to Ripley, was one of several churches that in 1807 joined forces to establish the Kentucky Abolition Society. Think about that, 1807. 1807 was also when the black laws were passed in the state of Ohio. And 1807, the first abolitionist society, one of the first anti-slavery societies in the nation, was established in Kentucky, largely due to the Presbyterian, Methodist, and Baptist church participation. That was, by the way, a society that had a constitution that I could find that was written in 1808, calling for an end to slavery, and even asking for anti-slavery sermons and speeches. That's 1808. Thus, when Rankin arrived there in 1817, he was allowed to expound on the evils of slavery from the pulpit as loudly as he wished. Plus, he met people in Kentucky who helped him find places where he could secretly and safely teach slaves to read, which was a violation of state law. Preaching in favor of immediate emancipation, Rankin once wrote that he and his colleagues in the Kentucky Abolition Society promoted the concept, quote, this would have been in probably 1819. If the slave has a right to freedom at all, he has it right now, unquote. In his 4 years in Kentucky, Reverend Rankin gained followers who never abandoned him, even after he had moved beyond the river to Ripley, which was on January 1st, 1822, after which the trust and teamwork on both sides of the river would begin to vastly expand. There is always more to say on this topic, largely because we continue to discover more about exactly what happened during those antebellum years as we break through the barriers of misconceptions, myths, and lies. Recently, I've learned, for example, about the crucial roles of the female abolitionists. So many of them fell through the cracks of history, despite the fact that William Lloyd Garrison referred to the women as the backbone of the anti-slavery movement. And I've been running into new details about the clergy who were not in favor of the Underground Railroad because they thought that helping slaves escape was tantamount to stealing slave owners' property. At the same time, some abolitionists had little respect for the clergy who would not stand by immediate emancipation as the only solution. Anyone who didn't believe in that was complicit to the system of slavery. There are so many striking stories to uncover, stories that reveal the challenges of true teamwork and the courage of trust. As I said earlier, these were ordinary people dedicated to extraordinary quests. They were citizens of conscience. So in closing, let me just say that the next time you are sitting on a train, a plane, subway, or bus, or out to dinner with friends and someone brings up the topic of the Underground Railroad and focuses on tunnels, cellars, or secret annexes, you can remind them that at the heart of it all were the networks of men and women, black and white, who showed exactly what trust and teamwork can accomplish, and who could be found on both sides of the river. Oh. That's the end of the lecture. Thank you. One thing that authors always do is read their favorite parts of their books. And so if there's time, I could read you 2 paragraphs. But I had an editor, a wonderful editor years ago, really terrific, that he told all of us, he was at WSJ, told all of us, never fall in love with your own writing. And so I believe he's right, but you can't help but like one or two paragraphs in a 300-page book. Isn't that okay?
Please read.
Am I allowed?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a couple of favorite paragraphs, and also I think my next book really should be The History of Post-its. Yeah. A self-help book. Having any problems in life? Get some Post-its. Can't remember what page you were on? Put a Post-it in. No, just kidding. But at any rate, I have a couple favorite paragraphs. Okay, but my very favorite is, and I'll do that one first. Very, very favorite is the closing paragraph. So hopefully people read the whole book, and get to the closing paragraph. But just in case they don't, here it is. I love this because of, well, you'll see why, I think. It says a lot. So, one day in the summer of 1892, just after sunset, Dr. Isaac Beck heard that rapping at the door that was once a common sound in his household. Standing on Beck's porch was a gray-haired black man who said he was traveling through Ohio to solicit funds for the benefit of a freedmen's college near Memphis. He was a college professor, and he was a former fugitive slave. As he was coming through Brown County, he decided that he must take the time out from his work to find the people who had helped him escape many, many years before. Most of them, he learned, had already passed away. He remembered that Dr. Beck was one of the people who had carried food to him while he was hiding in a field outside of Sardinia. It had been 50 years, he said, but he could still recall the meal. He told Beck he had gone all the way to Canada and then later, some years after the war, had returned to Tennessee to raise his family. Beck was touched that the man would seek him out, but as the man was about to leave, he realized that all through the conversation he had never asked the man his name, nor had the man offered it. "Sir, what is your name?" he asked as he shook the man's hand at the door to bid him farewell. The man smiled and said, "My name is Rankin, after the man who took me in my first night here." Always gets to me. How is that possible? It still gets to me. Okay, so do you like that one?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, then let's see. We have another one that the Post-it must have gone on vacation. I don't see it. Let's see. Okay, here it is. This is another favorite. The summer of 1838 was hotter than usual in the towns on the Ripley line, especially inland from the river. On weekends, families flocked to the shores of the river where temperatures were a few degrees cooler. Children crowded the sandbars, splashing and screaming as they escaped from the wretched air into the lukewarm water. Ladies conversed over the fluttering of their fans in parlors darkened by shades and drapes pulled tightly closed to shut out the sun. Days were longer than nights, though little was accomplished, since the pace of life was so slow that even the box turtles moving through gardens and across roads seemed to move faster than most people. The horsemen who came over from Kentucky seemed all the more conspicuous that summer as they frantically ran their horses through the quiet, sluggish town into the hills where they gathered posses of like-minded men and hunted humans as if they were deer. Okay, so then I have one other one, and then that's it. Then you'll be allowed to go. But you want to stay longer, and we'll just read the book together. What do you think? Yeah, no. Let's see if I can find this. Okay, so anyhow, I'll have to call that editor and tell him that I read 3 favorite parts of my book to an audience, and they seem to okay about it. Yeah. Okay. They don't think I'm arrogant and conceited. Just a writer trying, you know. Okay, so this is called Waves Break on Either Shore. On a blustery night in late February 1838, somewhere across the river from Ripley, the ice was breaking under the weight of an animal's body. Or was it the body of a human? The man standing on the banks of the Ohio side near the mouth of Red Oak Creek wasn't exactly sure what was causing the sounds he heard. His gun at his side, his ears primed to every discernible sound, his body wrapped in several coats to brace against the chill of the river winds. Chauncey Shaw had roamed these banks nearly every night since the river froze on February 22nd, waiting, hoping, and listening for the sounds he was now hearing, the telltale sounds of the struggle of a slave escaping across the river. Slave catchers like Shaw knew that when the river froze, the temptation for the slaves to cross the icy, quote-unquote, road to freedom was sometimes too great to resist. Like the buzzards crisscrossing the sky above the river, the manhunters scouted the banks at night, watching the spots where skiffs had landed runaway slaves in the past, and waiting. Skilled in the treachery of slave catching, Shaw was confident that patience would be rewarded, up to $500 for a fugitive slave captured on the Ohio side. But on this night, the ice had begun to thaw. He knew the odds were slim that his waiting would earn him any reward. Quote, all the boys in town had been down on the slow ice that very afternoon. They knew the ice was rotten with air holes and cracks extending almost across the river. Unquote. John Rankin Jr. wrote later in his diary, what slave could be desperate enough to try to cross on a night like this? Still the cracking and splashing echoed back and forth against the snow-encrusted hills of both shores, and the sounds grew louder. Then came the baying of the hounds, the voices of men in pursuit, the desperate crying out of a woman. This was it. Shaw knew, the long-awaited catch. His pace quickened to nearly a run as he moved along the bank, tracking the sounds in an effort to target the exact place the slave might land. In crossing the river from the other shore was a slave woman who belonged to a farmer a few miles south of Dover, Kentucky, on the river, just 5 or so miles from Ripley. She had fled upon learning that a slave dealer had been meeting with her master about the sale of his slaves, including her 2-year-old child. From that moment, freedom seemed as necessary as drawing breath. There was no going back. That's all I'm going to read. Okay. I must read the book to find out what happened. Okay. At any rate, thank you all for coming. And let's see, if you have any questions, now is the time to ask them. And yes, that lady, yes.
I just want to thank you for a wonderful presentation, bringing the whole antebellum area to life. The date that I latched onto, I may have it wrong, is 1787, when the movement to sort of differentiate between the slavery and free states began. You mentioned women. At the basis of the underground movement, the backbone, I wonder if you could just sort of give us some details about how women, you talk about the men all the time, of course, because they have the voice, but where did the women factor in as the backbone?
The clever way to answer that is to say, stay tuned, there's a book coming out. Yeah, and a book that I can't figure out the right title for, quite frankly. But at any rate, maybe I can get a vote in here for which title. But so that is That is something I've been curious about ever since I wrote Beyond the River, and I put that curiosity aside for years, more than 20 years, because I knew that digging into the way to answer that question would be to read. The women were prolific letter writers, so we have letter collections at University of Michigan, Boston Public Library, Philadelphia. It's Library of Congress. There are fabulous collections of letters, and I've been reading through letters and diaries and anti-slavery newspapers to see where they fit in, and why Garrison would say that he believed that women were the backbone of the anti-slavery movement, and he said that several times after the end of the Civil War. And so how they fit in is the book I'm writing. And so at this point, I've written, I have a deadline next week, and so I don't think I could answer your question except in about 5 hours. Because it's sort of, so if you want to discuss it for 5 hours, but there are many different ways, and I think what is there are many things that are very interesting about these women, and there are so many. In the state of Ohio, I think was one of the three, Massachusetts, New York, and Ohio had more female anti-slavery societies than any other states. Ohio was incredibly, was filled with many women who were working against the system of slavery and working very hard. And they did all kinds of things, a lot of fundraising, a lot of risk-taking in terms of helping fugitive slaves. You will be amazed, and there are so many of them. And so I've asked my publisher if it's all right at the back of this book to put, because my book is about 7 of the women, and from the 1820s through the war, and how they interacted, 2 from Boston, 2 from Philadelphia, 2 from Cincinnati, and 1 from Ontario, and how they work together. But what I have discovered in doing the research is just loads of women. And so what I want to do is put at the back, but I don't want to call it an appendix, because this is narrative nonfiction, so I need to put, a section at the back that has all the names, so that people can see how many, and I'm working right now on figuring out exactly why they fell through the cracks. But it happened in the Reconstruction era.
Yep.
Yeah, and so that will be the subject of the epilogue, why. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I really can't reveal a lot at this point without going into 5 hours of explaining, because I just wrote 190 pages. Yeah, it's okay. It was a good question. You'll get an A. I promise. Okay, yes, sir. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In a world of persecuted people, it brings to mind for me what is going on now with the Hispanic community. And I do know of 2 people who have hidden Hispanics in their cellars and under stair cupboards. And these 2 people were in fact jailed, and they were 70-year-old women.
Wow.
Quakers, actually. And so let's hear it for women.
Yeah. As I said, history, it's important to know history so that it doesn't happen again. Yeah. It doesn't repeat itself, it just rhymes. Yeah. Sometimes, unfortunately. Yeah. Yes, sir.
On page 163 of your book, you write, when John Mahan was falsely imprisoned in Kentucky,
Right.
that he wrote a friend about his conditions and the faith that he has in God to get him through all that.
Right.
Would you happen to remember who that friend might be, and would that letter be in the archives of the Ripley Library?
That's an excellent question, and there's a woman working on a very detailed book about the John Mahan story. And she's gone into all my old files, and she's gone to Frankfurt, she's actually gone to Illinois where the children moved, and she's doing excellent research. She would be the person who could answer your question. And after this, I'll give you her contact information. She will love to answer that, yeah. Yeah, that's a fascinating story, especially from the point of view of transformation or something, because the judge was known for being a pro-slavery judge, and he argued, or he spoke to the jury about the importance of acquitting John Bennington Mahan for all kinds of reasons. So it's a fascinating story. But that was a very important legal battle. Yeah. And talk about deceit. You know, he was, John Bennington Mahan was betrayed. He thought he was helping a slave escape, and the slave had been forced by his owner to pretend he was escaping, and then the owner came out of the woods with a posse and arrested, kidnapped actually, legally kidnapped Mahan. But a fascinating story, and it's still, there are parts of it that I think I devoted a chapter or a chapter and a half to it, but there's still a lot to be known and uncovered in that story. And the slave who was forced to betray John Mahan then became a hero later. But there's, there's a lot that needs to be told in that story, and I think that the woman who's doing it is doing a great job. She lives in New York, and she comes here and does research like 3 or 4 times a year. Yeah, so I'll give you her contact information. Okay. It would be better, yeah. Okay, so, yes.
I've often wondered about the wisdom, and obviously it worked for many of these people, but of drawing attention to oneself as an anti-slavery advocate and then participating in the Underground Railroad. So Rankin, there's his house on top of the hill. Everybody knows that if there's anybody in the area, for instance, who's going to be protecting fugitive slaves, it's going to be Rankin. And yet he is participating.
Right.
And there are others, like who have absolutely drawn attention to themselves through their writings, through their speaking. What is your assessment of that? Was that a strategy among some?
Well, it's very interesting because it's true with the women too. Like 2 of the women who, one was a mentor of the other, mentor was really always a behind-the-scenes organizer, and she did not want the spotlight on her. And one of the women she mentored became a fabulous orator. And so I think it was, in my humble opinion, with the women, I think it was they were discovering, perhaps for the first time in their lives, that they had certain skills and they wanted to, hone those skills for this cause. For everyone, I think that for Rankin it was inescapable because he was already well known. You know, he was in danger in Kentucky for all he did in trying to teach slaves to read and write, and he was already part of a network, early on in that, on that side of the river. And so when he came here, he had no choice. I mean, when he first came to Ripley, there were gangs that knew he was there, and they would throw stones at the window windows while he and his family would eat dinner, you know, so what was he going to do? You know, he wasn't going to hide and be, anonymous. He couldn't, and so he turned that. Plus, he was ardent about immediate emancipation, which was a very, very hugely debated topic. And so I think it was just I have never seen signs of ego, you know. I know it's there, you know, because it always is, but most of these people were just appalled, you know, like those words in John Rankin's letters about, you know, the love of gain and the basis of racial prejudice and what they were seeing all the time. And also there's a very interesting detail, and that is that, which I have discovered with some of the women also, is a very human condition. There were women who were vocally anti-slavery, but they really didn't want to get involved at all. You know, they didn't want the image of being involved, especially some wealthy high society in Boston and Philadelphia. But they, when they had the experience of seeing a slave, I mean, this is what happened with Harriet Beecher Stowe. She went to a slave auction. And this is what happened to John Rankin's son. He wanted to be an architect. He was in a steamship and in a class, and he wandered down to the bottom of the ship, and there were more than 50 slaves in chains in the bottom, including women, and it changed his life. And so, and Chauncey Shaw, what I just read you, he came from a slave catcher's family, and after, according to John Rankin Jr.'s diary, after this, Chauncey Shaw was not a slave catcher anymore, because he witnessed the courage of that woman. And so, you know, I think a lot of it is the shocking realization of the reality of what slavery was, and it was an intellectual issue. You know, it was a political issue. It was a established religious issue. But then it became moral suasion. It became, visceral, because after people really witnessed it. And so sometimes I think some of these people, you know, and William Lloyd Garrison was blamed for being, you know, really egotistical and, you know, difficult and yada, yada, yada. But when you see what he was up against and you see what he did, you really have to respect that. And I think that what the danger is that I have never, actually it's been on my list for years, but I don't think it's a book that I'll be able to get a contract for, but I wanted to write a book about the history of the ego, you know, because I think it would be fascinating, because I think in that period of time, fear, danger, hatred, you know, battles for moral suasion, et cetera, sort of didn't allow any time to be egotistical, you know. So where were the egos then? Well, in Congress, and you could see them in 1836 when they produced the gag rule, and so that women who didn't have a vote and women who could not run for office, and the only thing they could do was do petitions. Then in 1836 there were just too many anti-slavery petitions, so then so the egos were there, and they passed in 1836, May 1836, the gag rule that said, let these petitions, anti-slavery petitions, come into Congress, but they're just going to be put on the table and not read. And so, you know, so if you want to find ego in that period, go to Congress. Yeah. It's interesting, but there are still people who were, you know, passionate, you know, and knew that they were risking their careers for something they so believed in, and so, you know, the moral suasion or the moral brilliance and judge in the Mahan trial, fascinating. You know, a pro-slavery guy who knew it was wrong to convict John Bennington Mahan. You know, and so you have all these people kind of popping up and changing because they've been thinking it through, or they were, usually it's because they witnessed the auction of a slave, or the separation of families. That's another big one, yeah.
They were exposed to slave narratives more and more, and going to the Lycea and hearing fugitive slaves or former slaves talk about their experiences.
Yeah,
and
right.
The Fugitive Slave Acts.
And the Fugitive Slave Act, which was supposed to knock every abolitionist off its feet, but what it did was it encouraged people who had no desire previously to be an abolitionist, but they did not want to get arrested for happening to help someone one day. And so it was very, very interesting. So I don't really know how to answer your question. What's your name again? Send me a letter. Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer, but I honestly think that the study of ego throughout the history of in the last 250 years, this country would be very interesting. You know, where does it hide?
Well,
when does it come out of hiding? When does it take over? You know,
The most recent chapter might be a book in itself.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Anyhow, so any questions? Let's see. Oh, so can I run? I don't know if we want this on the video or not, but could I run a voting in terms of titles for
Focus group.
Yeah, focus group. But yeah, my original working title was Fearless, and of course that is not working because there are about 150 other books, pamphlets, rock groups, you name it, called Fearless. So that didn't work. So then I went to Undaunted. They don't want something that starts with so I get it. Unstoppable and Undaunted, no. You know, it'll have a subtitle of some sort. So I've narrowed it down to 3, and the first is Attitude and Fortitude, because that's what it took for these women, attitude and fortitude. And the next one is Go Home, in quotes with an exclamation point, because every time these women went on the road to do lectures, the local anti-abolitionist newspapers, there were so many newspapers in those days, would oftentimes have a headline that would say, Go Home, you know, because they wanted the women out of the pulpit, off of the podiums, everything, and just to go home. So I thought, why not call the book Go Home? Okay, and the other is the Ladies Department, because that's what William Lloyd Garrison called his wonderful, that he started in 1832, his 3 or 4 page section that was just women's essays, letters, poems, whatever. It was devoted to women, and it was called the Ladies Department. So, who's in favor of attitude? Yes, sir.
Is there any chance I could propose a variation to Undaunted as possible?
Of course.
What about instead of Undaunted, Dauntless?
Dauntless. Dauntless. Okay, let's vote. Okay, so who wants? Let's start with attitude and fortitude. Who wants attitude and fortitude? 1, 2, 3. All right. Yeah. Good. Okay, attitude and fortitude. Who wants dauntless? Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna still put it on the list. Yeah. Okay. Who wants to go home? Yeah, okay. Once again, how many, let's see, attitude and fortitude again. Okay, yeah. Okay, and the Ladies Department. Well, the man in the second row there thinks it sounds like the history of lingerie, but okay. Well, it looks like the winner is go home. Oh wow. Okay, I'm going to turn all four of them in. I like the idea of dauntless. Yeah. But anyhow, yeah. So thanks. You're all going to get an A. So don't worry. And thank you very much. I think this is. I think we need to conclude. So thank you for coming. And this is a wonderful place. Think about this place with its history. Yeah, and the whole history of the borderland. So thank you very much, and it's great meeting you all. Okay.